All right, if everybody wants to grab a seat, we'll get started. So first thing I want to do is one of our colleagues, Councillor Martin out of Surrey, is ill and is taking some time off to hopefully recover and get back stronger than ever. And you'll see, welcome Councillor Gill there from Surrey. So we wish Mary all the best, and you can pass that on from us if you don't mind. And welcome Tom to board. All right, with that, adoption of the agenda, and we're going to add just sort of one point under the reasons to go into closed at the end. We're going to add 91G for litigation or potential litigation. So with that, can someone please move? Is that right? Oh, and sorry, just one other thing. On table is an additional item for H1 about the notice of motion. So with that, can someone move the agenda, please? Moved and seconded. All those in favor, opposed, carried. Minutes from November 25th. Moved and seconded. Any errors or omissions? Seeing none. All those in favor, opposed, carried. We have a consent agenda in front of us. Would anybody like to remove anything out of the consent agenda? Director Jackson.
Thank you, Chair. Could I briefly discuss 1.1 and 2.2, please?
I'm always scared when someone says the word briefly talk about. All right, anybody else like to remove anything out of the consent agenda? All right, would someone like to move the consent agenda? Moved and seconded, last chance. All those in favor, opposed, carried. On to item 1.1. Director Jackson, did you want to move the motion or?
Yes, could I please?
Is there a seconder? Seconded, thank you. Back to you, Director Jackson.
And I just wanted to make a brief comment, Chair. This started way back in 2015, and I don't know that people really realized at the time the air quality was so poor. I guess I noticed it because I have a daughter that's on oxygen 24/7, and going outside was pretty awful. When I looked at our air map, we were up around 60 on the scale, and it started from there, and it is like residential wood smoke in our urban area. So I really want to thank staff for coming forward with this. I appreciate that there are lots of people in the region, in the outer areas, that have to work with wood because that's maybe what they heat with. But I think in the urban areas we're very concerned about the wood burning, and I think, and I said this at the committee meeting as well, I hope that we use the carrot and not the stick and do the education component. So thanks to staff for bringing this forward. Thank you.
Appreciate that. Any other speakers? Seeing none. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Moving on to item 2.2. Direct to you, Director Jackson. Did you want to move this?
Yes, could I?
Moved in. Is there a seconder? Seconded. Back to you, Director Jackson.
I just wanted to understand, Chair, why we would be really changing this. Is it really required? My concern is that we may run into a situation where we're going to have to reverse this again. And I don't know, this has been in place for a very, very long time, and I just wonder what the real, is there a real reason for us to actually have to change all of our policy when, if you're on a board, you're normally there. If you're not on the board, you're normally not there. It just seemed pretty simple to me.
Yeah, and up until a few years ago, 5 years ago or so, we had sort of an unwritten process that people that were sitting around this table that weren't part of those boards, they just kind of stayed and listened and that sort of thing. Didn't participate, but were there. And then we had our Fraser Valley Regional District participants on the parks make quite a situation out of not being invited to them because they felt that they could participate and help us make decisions. And so we got very strict with our regulations. And so the people that were not on the water or the GVS and ED, we asked them to leave. even though they were Metro Vancouver directors. And they would come and go, and because all that. And so we thought we would just try to clean it up, and so that they could stay unless the board felt that that board felt that it was not appropriate for them to be there. So you're right. At a certain point, a board in the future could say, you know what, we want to get back to if you're a member, you stay. If you're not, then you leave. And we're just trying to find that balance with our GVRD colleagues to be able to listen in to some of those conversations, because it's a major part of what the overall organization does, even though we have 4 separate boards to make up that organization. That was the thinking.
Okay, thank you. I guess I just don't see the necessity for it, but thank you.
Thanks. The other part was our legal and some of our staff were getting a little anxious when they would say, hey, you got to ask these people to leave now. And I'm like, well, they're just us. Let's not worry about it. Let's just get through the agenda, because sometimes by the time they get to that door, we've passed through that agenda. And it's just trying to find that balance and clean it up. So, Director Harris.
Thank you very much. I just want to say I appreciate this, particularly at committees. I happen to have this weird position where I don't sit on every committee, but the issues in the electoral area are so often related to one committee or another. And for me or my alternate to be able to come in and listen to what's going on, to understand the nuts and bolts of something, to be able to pitch in, if necessary, offline, or to understand the issue so that when it comes to the board, I find that as a director, I can do my job much better. So I really appreciate this, and we're fully supported. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, I see no other speakers, so we'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion passes. We're now moving on to item G 1.1, and we have to split this. A, would someone like to move A? A? Thumbs up. Moved. Is there a seconder? Seconded. Any questions or comments? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Carried. And B? Moved and seconded. Any other questions? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Carried. We have one on notice of motion that was given, a 2017 standing committee discussion by Director Smith, and we put on table sort of the work that we've been doing over the last few years to try to compile what we've done around finance. So, Director Smith, would you like to move your motion?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I'll move my motion.
Is there a seconder? Seconded. Back to you, Director Smith.
Well, let me first say I'm a little surprised to find this on everybody's desk. You know, I think, as Shakespeare said, methinks thou dost protest too much. You know, I didn't realize it was usual that staff would start debating a motion before it's even come to the board. So I find it a little offline and a little bit, really, frankly, inappropriate. You know,
Just a point of information, did ask at the last meeting for staff to bring forward what they were doing on the budget and the various committees. So I don't think it's an initiative they brought on their own. I asked for that information because I wanted it for myself to be able to listen and debate the motion.
Thank you for that clarification. Back to you, Director Smith.
I don't understand why the establishment of a finance committee strikes such fear in the hearts of this board and our staff. You know, the reality is we're spending $700 million of public money on our operating budget, and we passed it, I think, in December on a consent agenda item. And I frankly don't consider that proper oversight and proper accountability for public money. That's the role of this board, and I don't know how you do that. And I've had a lot of experience in the private sector and in the public sector at this, and I don't know how you do that without a finance committee, a relatively small number of people with experience who drill down into the budget, looking for areas that should be called for further examination. That's the way it's done everywhere in the world. Why can't we do that in Metro Vancouver? What is the great fear of establishing this finance committee? I'm just kind of blown away. You passed a $700 million budget on the consent agenda item. No discussion, no debate. I mean, this is public money. We don't have an obligation to provide any oversight, any examination. I'm on the Policy Procurement Committee. There's no budget oversight on that committee, or at least very, very little. So, I frankly think that the public deserve a full-time finance committee of people who will, make sure that as much as they can do, that the $700 million of public money that passes through this organization is properly spent. I'm not implying that it's not well spent. All I'm saying is that, we should be offered that guarantee to our taxpayers that we've at least attempted to make sure that it's well spent. So I won't say any more.
Well, can I just ask you, we've laid out here the multiple steps that the budget goes through a 2-month process just on the budget itself to get to the bylaws themselves might have been passed, and actually bylaws aren't passed in consent, but the bylaws themselves might not have had much debate because there was so much debate going forward. So I guess the question I have for you is, in this process that we go through and that every committee is responsible for going through their budget, why isn't that adequate? And then secondly, when you say full-time, what do you mean by full-time?
I wasn't referring that it'd be a full-time committee. I'm just saying that the full-time role of the committee as a committee is that it looks only at the budget. That's its role. So it meets monthly and reviews the budget, if that's what I mean by full-time.
Okay.
If you think I'm looking for an extra job, believe me, I'm not. But,
All right.
I've been around here for 5 years, and I don't see what I would consider, based on my 46 years of, I think, pretty good business experience, that there's real sound oversight of the $700 million of public money we spend. So I'll let my remarks stand, and I'm sure they'll be taken to heart, as they usually are when I make them in these meetings.
Thank you very much. Director Jordan.
Thank you, Chairman, and appreciate this coming forward.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
It's the auditor. She looks right at you immediately, by the way, Derek. Sorry, Director Jordan.
Thank you. I think what we should do with this idea and concept and the information that's in front of us today is refer it to our discussion at our planning session that's coming up in February. Because I think that there's some serious issues that we should be spending more time on with regard to budget process finances. But I also think there's implications for how the committees are structured, and there was reason why finance and intergovernment were put together, right? So to separate that and put it back to a singular finance committee the way it used to be, what does that mean? What are the implications of that? What does a finance committee do? I sat on the previous finance committee. I sit on the now performance and audit committee. Had the honor to be the vice chair and took the chair for a meeting earlier this year, and it was 20 minutes. Right. So really, so do we really? And usually finance and audit are together, but in our instance here, finance is separated from audit. So other than the audit role, I'm not sure that the performance role that committee is doing right now is really as good as it could be, or serves a function, I guess, is what I'm saying, that's necessary to this board. And also, I know in other private sector boards and things, we get financial statements and progress statements on finances at every board meeting. I mean, when we get them here once a year, right? So how do we know in between, 6 months, 4 months into the year, whether the budget's coming along well, whether it's anywhere close, And I know that, staff have told us with the new financial processes that they're bringing in and the new ability for, with the new technology and things, that it will hopefully be able to change. But So how is that going to, work itself through the governance structure of the organization? So to me, I think it's a longer discussion that's worthwhile having. For example, at Harrison Island, we're going to be talking about the long-term financial plans, I think there, and I think maybe it's appropriate to combine a discussion about how the governance piece of finance melds with the operational side of finance and have it in that forum, because I am sympathetic to Director Smith's motion, but it has other implications that I just wouldn't want to say I want to vote on yes today. So I think that's an opportunity for us to discuss it in that forum and see if we can, come up collectively with a better resolution that addresses the concerns about the oversight as well as the structures of the organization.
Okay, that's a thought. Maybe I'll say a couple words because I'm the one that creates the committees.
That's right, you are.
So when we changed from a budget and audit committee or whatever it was called to bring that forward to the new Finance and Intergovernmental Committee, we did that, I think, 5 years ago or so. And we made the membership of the Finance and Intergovernmental Committee the chairs of each of the committees. So they can have a correlation or a connection between the chair of each of the committees and the budget, right? So we wanted to create that connection. At the same time, we wanted to, and I wanted to, allow a committee to take a deeper dive, I think exactly what Director Smith is talking about, into the budget. And so a performance of the procurement side of it is that opportunity. It reports, there are reports that go to that committee on a quarterly basis, outlining the actuals versus the budget. If the performance committee isn't taking that deep dive in, then let's look at what we're doing at the performance committee to alter the terms of reference, alter the work plan that's going to be adopted in that committee in January. Because I will tell you, the goal of that committee when I created it was to give it the horsepower, and that's why I actually appointed Director Smith to it, so that he could bring all of that experience to take that deep dive into different aspects of the budget, into the different aspects of the performance of the organization. That was the goal. If it's not happening, then let's revisit why it's not happening and take a look at those terms of reference in the work plan to ensure it's meeting those objectives. But I think the challenge we had with the budget committee in the past was there wasn't a connection to the budget committee and the committees, the other committees themselves that were overseeing the budget and the board, because it was there just wasn't that direct connection. And so we try to create that direct connection by having the chairs of the committees on overseeing the budget throughout the whole year. So that was the thinking behind it. I have Director Villeneuve, but I wasn't sure if you were, that was just for your point of motion or point of information.
That information, thank you.
Thank you. Vice Chair Louis?
Essentially, I think, Mr. Chair, you've covered my points. I'll just reiterate the one, though, is that the intent of the committee chairs being on finance and intergovernment, which I chair, is that we can ask the questions of these committee chairs of why specific items are in the budget, how it was formulated, and what process, and get the information necessary before we make a final decision at the larger board. And I wanted to emphasize the fact that when the comment is made that there's it's adopted on consent and there's little oversight or no oversight, the opportunity of you as board directors is to make your comments known and your positions known here at the board, as you're doing today. That it is open to you to challenge the budget and make amendments even up until the adoption of the bylaws, and that's your role as directors, and so it shouldn't be seen as limiting. Now, Mr. Chair has already, and through the memo, highlighted a number of steps that we take at Metro. Can we improve upon them? Yes, I think we always can and should always look at that if it's not responsive to the needs of our directors. But there's a limit, I think, on how deep and how far we go into the weeds on things and how much we allocate through to and delegate through to our committee members themselves. This is the structure that we work on. We are a fairly large board and likely to grow into the future, and we rely heavily on our committee structure in order to give us the advice we need in order to proceed. And so we rely upon them helping us to build our budget in smaller component pieces and then aggregate them together and vote on it as a whole budget. If we're not satisfied with that, which is the direction that we're currently underway, then certainly open to having a look at it again. But that's the background of why we do the things the way we do. We have multiple points, whether it's the board budget workshop, where all of you are invited to participate and voice your concerns. We have our Council of Councils, which is in proximity to the budget as well, where, of course, it goes beyond just the board directors, but our council members that can come. And Greg and I do a dog and pony show around the region to talk about what we do at Metro and what our priorities are, and that we receive the input from that as well. So there's a number of different input points. It's not as if this budget is created in isolation. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. Director Masato.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and I think a lot of it's been covered, but I appreciate where Director Smith and Jordan are speaking from. However, I think there's been some changes over the last couple of years by the senior staff that I think have made it more accountable. While I chair the Utilities Committee, we spend a tremendous amount at that committee. We've got now policies that anything over $5 million, it all comes to our committee for approval and for examination, and I think that's very important. And we never had that before. That was something that was just done in-house in staff. I think more specifically, we need to look at what's our procurement policy. Is that working well? Is that following the policies that we need to see at Metro Vancouver? We have a strong policy there. And I know that when we go out for bids for tender, we do a very strong process to get at least 3, if not more, for these huge projects. So there's a lot of accountability at the committee level that I think doesn't really come to this table, but a lot of work is done. And hopefully that would be where, Director Smith has got some of those concerns. I know there's a person from West Vancouver on the committee, and they go over the budget quite closely with that. So I have no trouble talking about it if we want to have a discussion at Harrison, but I'm pretty confident now that the way the staff have it set up, following our policies, it's a pretty tight policy that we have. And it needs to be that way, and I think it's been proving us quite well. We've really never had any challenges to those policies and how we're spending our money for all of our utility functions. And so I'll have a discussion, but I don't have any big concerns about which direction we're heading.
Thank you very much. Director Corrigan.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I wanted first of all to say that traditionally we had operated with a finance committee, and it had proved, I think, extremely useful over the course of many years. We had very good chairs of the committee who were focused entirely on the budget and the financial health of the organization. And while I understand the move to the Intergovernment Committee taking on finance and the responsiveness of the chairs to looking at the issues of budget constraints within each of the divisions that we work individually in, the Intergovernment Committee is a busy committee. It has a lot of tasks to take on, including HR and many of the decision-making capacities for the organization that don't fit within one of the existing committees. And also, often matters are referred from the committees to us in order to coordinate the responses from the committees. So it's a big job, and I find that the Intergovernment Committee is a busy committee. I don't know that we are putting the same level of attention into finance that was given by the committee earlier, and when it was their sole job to look at finance. And I appreciated a lot of the things that they did. I think some of the things they did, like, for instance, delving into procurement and beginning to ensure that our procurement policies and our process was one that we all could feel very confident in. Their work was very good in that area, and in many cases they showed us where within the system there was preferential treatment to some organizations who managed to keep getting contracts, and the process wasn't open enough and transparent enough to make everyone feel that this was a process that we could be confident in. And I think that was important. I think you want the same thing to happen with the Performance and Audit Committee, and as you expressed earlier, it may be that what we need to do is have a high-level discussion at Intergovernment Committee, which is coordinating what's happening with the budget and setting the targets for the budget. But we also need to have that in-depth discussion on an ongoing basis where reports are requested on a regular basis, that they're able to look at issues with more depth, that they can take issues that are raised by the board, and they can look into how those situations can, over the long term, be corrected, and also to see how the individual departments, after we've approved the budgets, how they're performing in regard to the numbers that they are supposed to attain, and get those regular reports that should come in. So I think there is a middle ground to be established. I think we need to empower the Performance and Audit Committee to be able to do many of the roles that the Finance Committee took on for us in the past, and that we don't have the time for at Intergovernment, nor did you intend we would have that time. But make sure that it's a meaningful job on the Performance and Audit Committee, where people really do feel that they're able to get in up to their elbows in ensuring that this system is responding in the appropriate way to the overall budget that's being set at the Intergovernment Committee, and that issues that are being raised are being examined in detail to ensure that we're doing the very best practices within our system. I think there is a point being made, it's a very good point by Director Smith and by Director Jordan, but I don't think you need to throw the baby out with the bathwater in order to accomplish it. I think if we follow your recommended course of action, which is reviewing what the Performance and Audit Committee is doing and the terms of reference for it to ensure that it's empowered to be able to look at these issues, I think we can resolve what is within the family an effort to try to ensure that we're doing the best job we can to protect the dollars that are being given to us by the taxpayer. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you for your comments. Director Stevenson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Through you, I'd like to ask Director Smith whether he's had the opportunity being on the committee that you placed to bring these issues forward and bring about any changes that he felt might be necessary, or whether there's been a sense of frustration on that committee for him. I also know that he has a great deal of experience in the private world, and I'm wondering if he has brought that to West Vancouver, and whether West Vancouver municipality's budget is more robust and transparent than he feels this budget is.
Director Smith, did you want to reply to that?
Well, I can assure Director Stevenson that we have a very robust budget process in West Vancouver. That, we have a finance committee, and they review every department, and every department manager has to, I think, box out of the meeting that feeling that they've been put through a rigorous process to defend the public dollars that they're charged with spending. So yeah, we have a very robust process in West Vancouver. And as regards the Policy and Procurement Committee, I think Director Jordan said it best. I mean, we arrive at the meeting, we don't set the agenda, we don't set the terms of reference, so we come, and if there's nothing on the agenda, we leave after 20 minutes and go home. So if that's what people consider oversight of the budget, then good luck to you.
Thanks. I will just correct one thing. The committees do set the terms of reference, and they make those recommendations for the board to then approve. And I will just read out one part of the terms of reference that have been adopted by the committee, which says, in part of it, to look after the day-to-day financial operations. And so at a committee, if you don't feel that you're getting the information that you need, you can put a notice of motion on there. You can request information from staff during managers' reports. There's a lot of mechanisms in a committee, and that's why we have committees, because they're set up to have that more in-depth dialogue at the table in front of us here instead of a formal board setting. So if people haven't, just quickly go online right now and take a look at the terms of reference. It frankly is addressing a lot of the concerns that are being addressed here. Whether they're coming up in the committee or not, that's the committee then to take charge of that. But I'm not sure how much more, and I'm open to the discussion well, obviously, we have to approve it as a board, the terms of reference. If there needs to be changes or more authority or more direction, then let's do it. But take a look at those terms of reference while this debate's going on to see what you think isn't there. And we can talk about it offline because we don't want to have a wordsmithing debate here at the board. We got a lot of stuff to get onto, but just take a look. Director Stevenson, did you have any follow-up to that?
No, thank you.
Thank you. Director Hepner.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I agree with many of the comments that Director Corrigan has made, that let's not throw the baby out with the bath. We have every expectation. I don't want to leave the impression in the public arena that we have not got the mechanisms in place to oversee millions of dollars worth of public money. And we certainly don't just see the budget and pass it in the blink of an eye. There are lots of opportunities. But I do think there is merit in potentially looking at the terms of reference, particularly of the Audit and Performance Committee, and whether or not it is robust enough within those terms to acknowledge that not only whether or not the numbers are playing out the way we expect them to, but whether or not there are processes within the organization that could be looked at or changed in some fashion, or tightened or not tightened. But I think it is an opportunity. We certainly do it in our city with an internal audit committee as well as an external audit. So maybe today, and certainly in my opinion, today is not the time to wordsmith those terms of reference, but maybe Harrison is. And we can all, in the meantime, take a look at what the existing terms are and whether or not we think that we can leverage the powers in a more robust way once we have that discussion. But I think the primary message today is we have existing processes in place and many opportunities to look at the budget, and I don't want the public to believe for a second that we do it as quickly as Director Smith has pointed out or made reference to.
Thank you very much. And I will also state that we're talking about doing this at our retreat, but the February, oh wait, that was last year, but the next Performance and Procurement Committee, which should, I think, be the first one of the year, will have work plan, will have terms of reference on the agenda. It's next Thursday, thanks. So, that committee should be able to take a deep dive and actually listen to this conversation and try to address those concerns at that meeting. Then those two items come to this board, probably at our next board meeting as well. So there's multiple ways for us to speak into what's going on at that committee, or frankly any other committee. Director Smith has highlighted one, but that's our role if we think that a committee should be doing a deeper dive into a certain area, is when we get the work plans at the committee or we get the terms of reference for approval. Director Walton.
Thank you. I apologize for being late. I got caught in the traffic, which doesn't happen that often on Friday mornings. And unfortunately, I wasn't aware having this dropped on the table is not the best way to prepare to address it. So I'm being sort of scrambling to sort of catch up and listening to the conversations, and I chair the committee, obviously, so that's somewhat of a concern. I certainly just wanted to point out that Phil and I do talk and look over the agenda a week before, as I think most committee chairs do, and we do go back and forth and make some changes, et cetera. So certainly that is functioning well. It's invisible, of course, to most committee members of most of the committees that intercourse between the chair and the staff support. So that certainly is happening. Just a couple of comments. I think there's some differences in from community to community or from GVRD rep to GVRD rep. And Greg, we've talked about this before. About I prefer to have as many of my councillors sit on Metro subcommittees as possible. And I have to say, and you've accommodated that. I've got, I think, 5 councillors sitting on committees, and I've chosen not to sit on those committees because I think I've got a very capable council, and we've gone from a sort of a hostile collective view of Metro Vancouver over the years to actually quite the contrary. Now I have my colleagues who are contributing and updating and feel very much a part of the process. It's been a very positive thing for our community. One of the things from that, though, is that that collective knowledge, if you like, of what's going on in all the committees is shared between us. And I think when it comes to the budgeting process, unlike Vancouver or Surrey, they may have 5 or 6 people sitting here and have more of a collective input and experience at the board table. It's just me here, and as a result, I think when sometimes I think that trying to get that collective overview of the entire thing, including the budget, including the capital items that are spread out. A lot of them are in Darrell's area and Malcolm's, and those committees are heavily involved in those. And I've got good counselors on both who do report back. So the district has has input, and that's good, but not so much me. So I think that I'm chairing the finance committee, so I'm relying heavily on their input offline, and I think that what's partially being reflected is that we used to spend more time, I think, within the finance committee. Whoever was on the finance committee was a layer of people that had that sort of deeper collective look at things from all of the committees. And I think, and I understand exactly where your thinking is in terms of going. You always create something positive and maybe lose a little bit, and that's just management. So I certainly I've felt at times. We had about 3 meetings last year, and they were over in about an hour. And there's no question that I think those of us were feeling that we should be doing a little more heavy lifting, and we were a little under challenged in terms of the value we thought we were putting forward to Metro. So I think it's it's a sincere concern that we put forward. It doesn't necessarily reflect that the work isn't being done elsewhere, but being part of an organization that doesn't have that sort of strong subcommittee overlooking all of the financial aspects of Metro Vancouver is probably, for some of us, is not what we experienced in a number of years ago. So I think it's something that needs to be mined a little further and discussed. But I certainly agree with the comments made about not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. There's no crisis here. It's just a matter of us trying to have the best way of doing things to make sure that we have the right oversight and governance. So thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Director Brody.
Mr. Chair, I found the comments here quite interesting. It's hard to argue with virtually any of them, frankly. I spent a number of years as the chair of the Finance Committee when it was called the Finance Committee. You'll remember our revisions to the Directors Board meeting fees, yes? But
the Brody rule. The Brody clause, I think it is.
We won't get into the chair's involvement in this. I'm just showing my credentials, that's
Very
all.
graceful.
So we did spend time on other matters. The point I want to make fairly briefly is, first of all, if you compare the processes that we had as a board at that time and the processes, the administrative backup, and the processes that staff had at that time, and you compare it to now, there's just no comparing it. There is a far more robust policy and procedure for the board with the budget workshops and various ways to give input at an early time, all the software that staff now has and their projections and their ability to analyze is really just is very, very different. But it is hard to argue, I think, that with the focus of something called a finance committee that actually has that in there, you got procurement and audit, performance and audit committee. I mean, everybody has to consider that to be the finance committee, and I'm not sure that that's happening so much. Most of the matters that can come to a finance committee can also go to another committee, to utilities, to zero waste, to the various other committees, and I think that that's happening to a certain extent. So, and I think that committee, I sit on that, no, I used to sit on that committee. I think it has to take a look at those terms of reference very carefully and to see whether, the role of the finance aspect of that, of their terms of reference, and maybe it's simply a matter of kind of embellishing a little on the terms of reference and having finance in the name of the committee or something like that, and that may well do it. But we need to make sure that we have a focus on finance in some kind of a committee. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Director Reimer.
Well, I think it's been an interesting debate, especially, I think I've been here now for 9 years, and I have heard now history that I had not previously been aware of, so there's always new things to learn about why and how things have been evolved. I do, sort of rolling it back a bit at a fundamental level, we have 2 committees right now that have finance and oversight, financial oversight functions in their terms of reference. This motion proposes creating a third. I do not feel that, I actually feel that that would work against any sort of meaningful, transparent oversight of finances when it's split across 3 functions. Plus, we know, those of us on committees, how much financial oversight we do of our individual budgets on top of that. So I'm not prepared to support this motion today. I do think there's been some interesting discussion about the manner in which the 2 existing committees discharge their duties. I would say, I mean, if we were a corporate board, I mean, this challenge with Metro, because we're neither directly elected nor, you know, it's similar to a corporate board and legally a corporate board, but somewhat different because of the political nature of the work that we do. I would say that an organizational consultant at this point would be telling us to do a self-evaluation of the individual committee members to get a better sense of why some of them feel like they're not discharging their duties and others do, and try and understand in amongst that what the best next step is. So I'm not prepared to support this motion. I wouldn't even be prepared to support a motion at this point that looks at all these terms of references without further information about why there seems to be this gap in experience at the committee of the different committee members.
Thank you. Thank you for your comments. Director Jackson.
Thank you, Chair. I agree. It's very interesting comments around the table. I tend to remember other times when we did have the Finance Committee, and both the chairs sit here with their vast experience from the past. I also understand why it was changed, and I think the idea being that you had all of the chairs from all of the committees around the table, so what better place to look at the finances. But I also am thinking too a little bit about the new era that is probably on our doorstep, and I'm talking about delving into NAFTA and all the things that may affect people, particularly in BC. Let's talk about Lower Mainland, and if there are things that a finance committee can delve into that are finance related, not necessarily having to do with water and sewer or parks or labor. I always found that was very useful years ago. We talked about the overall debt of every person in the region and what that meant provincially, federally, municipally, and regionally. And there was a lot of good work done in the very early times. Perhaps it isn't important to people today, and that's fine. But I guess, Chair, in listening to some of the debate around the table, I think we should always be open to reviewing our policy and procedures. I think it's healthy, and particularly if there's any, even one member that is having some difficulty with it, that we should at least overview it a little bit to make sure that everybody has a good feeling, particularly about the budget. It may be different for other components of our business, but the monetary factors here are very important to everybody, and of course that reflects immediately upon our residents of all our communities. So I would be open to further discussion for the sake of reviewing to ensure that we have everyone contented relative to our reporting out and our oversight of our finances. So if there were, I'm not sure if there was going to be a motion put to refer or not, but those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Director Smith, you have something new to add?
I just referred to the calendar, Mr. Chairman, and I noticed that the Performance and Audit Committee is scheduled for 4 meetings in 2017. So I would suggest that indicates that it was not the intent of this board to have the Performance and Audit Committee do a thorough review of, or in other words, replicate the role of a finance committee if you're only going to have 4 meetings a year. So that's what the calendar says.
Thank you for that, and I'm sure at your February 6th meeting, you can bring that up, and if the committee feels that they need to have more meetings, then they can schedule more meetings, as did the Housing Committee this past year, felt that they needed to have more meetings, so they took that and did more and put more meetings on the agenda. Director Jordan, you have something new?
I'm just trying to think that I think there's a sense around the table we need some more discussion, but you read the performance and audit terms of reference, so here's the intergovernment finance terms of reference is to guide and monitor the development of annual and long-term financial plans for consideration of the board and to guide the development of financial policies for the consideration of the board. So I think there's the conflict, is that Procurement and Audit Committee feels like the real decisions are made over there, and we're just, kind of checking off the balance sheets. And so that the Finance and Intergov Committee is where all the power about the finance is, and the other committee is just reporting out. Yep, we got the report, sign off, right? So that's where, and we don't know what they do, and they don't know what we do. So that's where there's some. It's not just about performance and audit committee. I think it's also about what does intergovernment finance do, right? And how the two things try to cover this topic area. So I'm not sure that just having. If we try to change our terms of reference in the Performance and Audit Committee, we want that back. Right? That's not going to work so well. So I think it's, again, a bigger discussion than just that committee.
Sure.
Can I refer to the discussion a further discussion at Harrison? Do you think that's, or at a planning session, whatever that's called?
So the challenge with referring it to Harrison, that's February 24th.
Yes.
So we have a discussion, then maybe we set some tweaking of terms of reference or committee terms of references for either of those committees. We'll get that implemented about the end of March, right? Because if you go end of February, it's got to go to committees for discussion first, and then it goes to board. So there's 2 weeks, and there's another 2 weeks, and so you're not going to see that until March. And what do we do in the meantime? I guess we just would allow the committees to continue doing as they're doing. I think if we were going to make changes, I think maybe we need to if we were to refer this back, expand on our 2-page memo that we put on the table to talk about all of the things that this organization does right now, what the different committees do, to frankly educate everyone that might not, if you're not on the Intergov and Finance Committee, you might not read the agendas. You might not read the terms of reference. You might not really even read the work plan on a month-by-month basis to see what's going on.
Diligently, I do that, especially that one.
Well, I assume that you do. I know you do. But I'm just saying, generally, that might not happen. And generally, people might not read the Performance and Audit Committee terms of reference and that sort of thing. So I think maybe there's we have to do a little bit of that education and write a report about what goes on in those committees. And expand on this 2-page memo to try to bring everybody up to speed what's going on. Because to be straight up, I haven't heard anything around this table that isn't being done. The only thing that I've heard is that maybe one group doesn't understand what the other group is doing, and maybe we can address that in some of our work plans, that there is a different type of check-in between the two committees. But even last year, I think it was last year that we were going to change some of the procurement process. We held a joint meeting between the two committees to go over that. So, when we saw stuff that was overlapping, because if you recall, before, we used to refer things to committees just to get their input, and it would go around the committee structure for a few months. And part of what we've tried to do over the last couple of years is ensure that it goes to the home committee. If there is an important issue that goes over a couple, invite the other members to it instead of referring and things being delayed by months. So we've tried to do that as well. So I'm struggling to find, I think it sounds like a lot that the Performance and Audit Committee needs to take a deeper look at their terms of reference, their number of meetings, what they're doing, and push harder. You're right, there is somewhat of a, the budget does reside with the Finance and Intergovernmental Committee.
Not just the budget, the development of the annual long-term plans
Yes.
and financial policies.
Yes.
Like you
They
got it
do.
all.
I agree, and I'm not apologizing for that, because that's where all of the committee chairs sit.
Yeah.
They're the ones that can speak on behalf of their committees and what's going on there. They can also go back and have that conversation that happens at the Finance and Intergovernmental Committee about those. But let's not, every one of those budgets that is ultimately goes through the Finance and Intergovernmental Committee is built by the other committees before it goes to that committee. It goes from the Utilities Committee and to take a look at it, then it goes to Finance and Intergovernmental to bring it all together, all of the committee budgets into one package. We then do our road shows, we do our council of councils, we do all of that, workshop with this group before it actually comes to the board. So it's still going to follow a similar process. If we shifted it all to Performance and Audit Committee, it's going to start there. It's then going to go to the other committees. It's then going to go to probably Intergov, Finance and Intergov, and then to the board. I just don't see why we don't want to have all of the committee chairs representing their committees dealing with the short and long-term budget discussion. It doesn't, to be straight up, it doesn't add up to me why we would want. I think what we want and what we're trying to get out of the Performance and Audit Committee is to take a look at the actuals, which is reported out 4 times a year. Take a look at the procurement procedures. This board and no committee ever approved procurement. We approved a budget and then staff implemented it, and they went with lowest bid for the most part. Now, as we see on one of our agendas today, we have an item that's $5 million or so, and it's coming to this board to approval. If we don't like it, we can send it back. If we want more information, we can ask for more information. Those decisions never came to the board before. They never even came to a committee for that matter.
Yes, they did.
Well, they came to a committee in a whole long list, but not one by one. There wasn't a report for every one of those decisions. It was a grouping of, we let these procurements and awarded these contracts on a quarterly or monthly basis. So it's a lot more in-depth than it was. If it has to go another step or two further, then let's do that. And I think the committee structure that we have there gives the authority to do that.
And I was very proud as a member of the Finance Committee to champion that whole review of that process and bring that forward. But I'm just saying that we put a new structure in place. It's been 5 years in place. There's pretty clearly some people are not satisfied with it, and I don't feel upset if some people think maybe we should look and see, has it worked well? Hasn't it worked well? And is there an even better way to do things?
Sure, and I'm always about making change and looking for better. And I'm sorry if I sound defensive, but I guess I just see things from a different perspective because I go to a lot of committees. I tried my best to at least read the cover sheets of every agenda that goes out there. So, and I'm sharing what I was thinking when we were building this. Director Walton, something?
Yeah, just a quick comment. We do have our meeting next week, and I will be talking to Phil today about the agenda. And I think we haven't discussed this at the committee level. I think my colleague's motion came up, I think, in the Metro table. So our performance financial planning oversight committee hasn't discussed this. So I think obviously we'll be discussing it in a couple of days from now. One challenge for the committee is we've got several councillors on who don't sit at the Metro board and aren't even aware of this discussion at all. But I think that those of us who've spoken today will put it on Phil. We still have time to approve the agenda. We'll get it on the agenda, and we'll come back and give our thoughts to Metro Vancouver at the next board meeting. So I don't think anything is going to, nothing's broken in the process that we can't work to put our ideas forward for the future. So,
great, thank you, and thanks for taking that on. Director Harris.
Thank you. And I was actually, Director Walton just covered what I was hoping to hear, that this would come back to this board after both committees that are charged with the oversight and have looked at it and considered their terms of reference. And one of the comments that Director Jordan made, I really want to pick up on, and it might reflect a little bit of what some of the other directors around the table feel, which is that she said that the power is all in the Intergovernmental Committee and in the terms of reference they've received. And I think that what can happen at this board is that as, I think the power has to ultimately be in the directors of this board, in all of us, because we, as a collective group, are all responsible for the financial decisions that are being made. So we actually do need to understand what's behind the recommendations. People on each committee will understand it. But I think perhaps that some of that has been lost. I can understand the reasons for why things are structured as they are, but some of that I think has been lost, at least from my perspective.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Director Becker.
Yes, thank you, Chair. The conversation for a newbie is very good, and thank you for the historical perspective. It strikes me that if the two committees were to consider this issue, would we have time, depending on the recommendations of those two committees, to deal with a referral to the Harrison retreat at another board meeting? I can't do the logistics in my head. Do we have another board meeting before Harrison where we could formally refer it?
Yes.
All right, that would be my ad hoc recommendation. The committees review this and come back to the next board meeting. I would then defer consideration of this motion to the next board meeting on the assumption that the committees will be able to weigh in, and we will then have a more fulsome conversation at the next board meeting and then decide whether or not it goes to Harrison.
So,
table it to the next meeting or defer. Yes, that would be my motion.
Can I suggest this? That the motion that was put on table, I think there has been enough discussion that we should have further discussion at the committees or at the workshop, that sort of thing. Absolutely. But I don't think this motion is going to reflect that outcome, right? The motion to request that the chair and the vice chair establish a full-time finance committee. That's not what I've heard in this discussion. What I've heard is maybe we need to change the terms of references of some of the committees, the work plans of some of the committees, change the connections to make sure that if there is overlap, how that occurs. Maybe there's joint meetings throughout the year, that sort of thing. But establishing a full-time finance committee, I think if we just defer that, I'm not sure if that reflects the discussion that's happened here today. So we could defer it, bring it back and vote on it, make amendments to it in the future, or we could vote on it now. Whichever way that goes, we'll deal with it. If it's defeated, I think we've heard enough conversation. The chair of that committee, the chair of the Performance and Audit Committee, the chair of the Finance and Intergovernmental Committee, the whole board, which, by the way, on the Finance and Intergovernmental Committee is 100% directors. On the Performance and Audit Committee, there's only 2 non-directors on it. So I think everybody's heard the conversation here. We'll have those conversations at the next meeting and bring back some proposed changes to address the conversation. So if you want to move deferral, I will accept it, of course, or table the defer the vote.
The point of my motion, Chair, was to ensure that this body retained control of this issue so that we could then refer it to Harrison. If the motion is voted on and defeated, I'm not sure that at the next board meeting we would then be able to engage the issue in whatever forum the committees come back to us on and then refer it to Harrison. If we only have one meeting before Harrison, how would we get this issue on the table there unless we retain some control of this motion?
The only thing I'll throw out there, the other, so we're working on quite a lot. We're spending a lot of time setting up the Harrison agenda, which I will tell you is all about the budget and the long-term budgeting to ensure that everybody participates and has comments in it, ironically. And it's tight to fit it into the schedule that we have right now. And if we were to throw another hour and a half discussion into that, we would be pushing off actual budget discussions. So there's our dilemma.
Well, I can appreciate that, but what my understanding is that by voting on this and perhaps defeating it because of the lack of understanding coming back to us from the committees, we would then have no ability to put it on the table at the Harrison retreat. And my personal belief is that policy and procedure sometimes trump the substantive discussions over the dollars and cents. So I'm, again, with respect, and I understand your point, I would, for the purposes of retaining this issue before the board, make that deferral motion so it remains alive for our next board meeting. If I don't get a seconder, then, well, we can move on.
Before we look for a seconder, can I offer a suggestion? That we defer this and instead of deferring it to Harrison at the end of February and that sort of thing, that we have a joint finance and intergovernmental and performance and audit committee and extend invitations to other directors who may wish to attend as soon as possible. So we still get that conversation happening, we just don't take away from the important discussion that we're trying to have at Harrison.
No, again, my motion is not to have this moved to Harrison, but to move it to the next board meeting, at which time we'll have clarity from the two committees, and then we can make a decision if we want to move it on. I just don't want to lose, I don't want to lose touch with this issue so that from a procedural perspective, we are unable to shoehorn this discussion, a very important discussion, into what we're doing at Harrison, that's all. I'm not suggesting by deferral that we defer it to Harrison, but merely to the next board meeting.
Okay, so Chris gave me some good advice.
That's his job.
It's all good advice, Chris, by the way. I just shouldn't say like this is the first time. That we refer this motion to a joint finance and intergovernmental and performance and audit committee. And that means the motion still stays alive. You refer it to those two committees for input and discussion, a joint meeting, and then all of that information with this resolution comes back to the table, and the board can then set direction from there.
That certainly honors what my intentions were, so I'm very happy with that. Thank you.
All right, that's seconded. I'm going to go to, I'll just keep this speaking order. Director Fox, you want to speak to the referral?
No, I was going to speak to the earlier discussion.
Okay.
The referral's fine.
Thank you. Vice Chair Louis, you want to speak to the referral?
I do. I will support the referral. I think what we've heard today is that there seems to be a significant disconnect of information that's made available. And it's concerning for me that I'm hearing this from our board directors, that apparently there is a disconnect between the processes that we currently undertake and the information that's necessary for you to feel comfortable. At least we haven't tested it through a formal vote, but at least the sentiment through what's being expressed seems to indicate that. So I think a joint committee meeting is important. What I would say, though, is that if there are further comments from the other committees, in order to preserve that connection that that the chair talked about with all the committees, which was through the Finance and Intergovernmental Committee chairs that sits on the committee, that you that sit on these other committees think about what it is that you do in your committees, and if there's input specifically on the budget and how it relates to your committee, and there are flaws or perhaps improvements that you think could be made, then express that to us at either of the committees, the audit or the Finance and Intergovernmental Committee, prior to us meeting, and give us those suggestions, because I don't think shoehorning it into Harrison is appropriate, but neither do I think that it be left with only two committees, because the same could be said for another committee that feels less information is being made available than necessary for them to feel good about the budget process as well. So I put that out there as an offer that certainly we want to hear from all committees. If there's an issue with our budgetary process, let's try to get this done and fixed the first time through. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. Director Long.
Well, actually, Mr. Chair, I was going to make the motion that was on the floor. If we, at the time I pushed my button, I think it was important that we did that. And the other thing was that I didn't see that this would be really something we'd want to refer to the workshop. That's something that goes beyond. But I just want to clarify your comments that this meeting, joint meeting of the two committees, would be open then to the whole board. Yeah.
Well, it'll be an open discussion. So we'll extend the invitation out to the rest. So it's not this isn't a closed discussion either. So yeah.
Yeah, I think that'd be good. Then anyone that's not on those committees can still attend and see what's happening. Thank you.
Yeah, and I just did a quick calculation. 19 of the 38 directors are represented on those two committees. So it's for sure the others can join, but just so that people don't think that this is going to be decided or the debate's going to happen by non-directors. There's only, of those two committees, there's only 2 non-directors on those 2 committees. So with that, we will vote on the referral motion. All those in favor? Opposed? The item's carried. Resolution to close under a few different things there. E, I, and G moved and seconded. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Motion to adjourn. Moved and seconded. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried.